محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
السلام عليكم.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. نحمده ونستغفره ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستنصره، فإنه حق من هدى الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد الحبيب المصطفى النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين، خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى صحبه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم يا رب العالمين، نسألك ونتوسل إليك أن تقسم لنا من خشيتك ما يحول بيننا وبين معاصيك، وأن تقسم لنا من رحمتك ما يقربنا من طاعتك، وأن ترزقنا من اليقين ما يهون علينا مصائب الدنيا وأحداثها. Subhanallah, at the critical point when Muslims were in this period of transition from a persecuted, subjugated, dominated life in Mecca to migrating to starting a new chapter where Muslims would assert their dignity, would assert their identity, would demand their autonomy, would demand their freedoms, where Muslims would engage the world in order to shape the world, in order to craft into this world spaces where the light of God can shine. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Muslims very clearly and bluntly and unequivocally, إلا تنفروا يعذبكم عذابا أليما ويستبدل قوما غيركم ولا تضروه شيئا والله على كل شيء قدير. إلا تنفروا. That word, nufur, from Nafar, Nafara. This is in Surah At-Tawbah. Right before this ayah, in Surah At-Tawbah, Allah poses the question to Muslims. يا أيها الذين آمنوا ما لكم إذا قيل لكم انفروا في سبيل الله اثاقلتم إلى الأرض رضيتم بالحياة الدنيا. That word, nufur, Nafara, means to rise up and proceed with great energy and deliberation. Nafar doesn't necessarily define what a person is accomplishing or doing as they rise up with great energy and deliberation. At this point, Allah could have said, O believers, if you don't fight in Allah's way, such and such will happen. But the choice of words is quite remarkable because it resonates through the ages. If you fail to be deliberate and energetic and assertive, if you fail to exercise the requisite level of energy in serving God's cause, fi sabilillah, the consequences, Allah quite bluntly tells Muslims, is that if you fail to serve the cause with all due diligence and deliberation and energy and power, Allah will allow all types of torments to fall upon you. Not only that, but after you sustain calamity upon calamity and disaster upon disaster, ultimately Allah will replace you altogether. Some other group, Allah could choose some other group to serve God's purposes on earth. And you, having failed yourselves in serving God's cause, you are replaceable and entirely forgettable. You take away nothing from God, you add nothing to God. Throughout modernity, religion is often accused of being the opiate of the masses. And it is quite true. Religion in modernity has often been used to subdue the masses, to get people to accept a fate that is unbecoming, to accept a fate that they should not accept, to accept a fate in which they are subdued, in which they are dominated, in which they are degraded. And religion easily falls in the trap of advocating to the disempowered and dispossessed that this is your fate because your God willed it to be so, and you have no other choice. But it is entirely incomprehensible when that phenomena effectively takes place where Muslims are concerned. Because Muslims very clearly, in very unequivocal terms, were put on notice by God that it is upon you to rise up, to demand your rights, to put in the investment in energy and willpower and hard work in God's cause. And God chose the word infiru, which is far broader than qatilu, which means to fight. Infiru is simply rise up energetically, which means that the nufur, the energy applied, could be in fighting, it could be in a military way, but it could equally be in the pursuit of knowledge. Nufur fi sabilillah could be in the pursuit of knowledge, could be in the pursuit of art, could be in the pursuit of anything, as long as it is done with utmost deliberation, effort, and energy, and it is done with the clear purpose of serving God's cause on earth. Fi sabilillah. The effort, the energy is dedicated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This, however, begs a question. Rising up in deliberation and energy and effort to serve God's cause is something that is demanded by revelation. And in fact, again, we are told very clearly, you either do this or you are entirely replaceable. But this does beg a question. Like all energy expended, like all efforts, that if you arise up with due deliberation and energy and vehemence and power, but nothing is as tragic as misdirected energy and misdirected power. How do we ensure that if in fact we rise up energetically and powerfully to serve God's cause, that what we are doing is in fact the right type of action needed under the given circumstances that confront us? This is common sense. Last khutbah, I said that Muslims are like slaves in a slave ship sailing to a penal colony. Well, in this slave ship, the slaves can rise up with all due deliberation and energy. But unless they have awareness, unless they are anchored in proper consciousness, they could rise up to achieve utter futility. They could rise up, for instance, to demand that women and men be separated on the slave ship sailing to a penal colony. What is the value of that type of nufur? They could rise up to demand that they have sufficient water to perform wudu while they exist on the slave ship sailing to a penal colony. Well, considering the circumstance, this is utterly futile and pointless. Okay, we'll give you enough water to do your wudu, but you will remain slaves on a slave ship sailing to a penal colony. They could rise up and even take command of the ship. But if they themselves don't know the art of sailing, if they themselves don't know how to navigate, if they don't have the requisite knowledge to turn the ship around so that it doesn't go to the penal colony, but goes to the land of freedom, then again, we've achieved futility. The Quran talks to rational people. The Quran talks to a presumptively intelligent people. And when Allah says, "Infiru fi sabilillah," rise in God's cause, the onus is on us to understand our circumstances, to understand our reality, to have the requisite technical knowledge, so that if we in fact commit to nufur, it is a nufur with a purpose and a cause, and ultimately it is a nufur that achieves God's purposes instead of a theatrical mimicking of an attempt to achieve God's purposes. Again, if you rise up, but you don't have the technical knowledge to navigate the ship after you take it over, you'll be lost in sea and nothing will be achieved. If you don't realize that you are on a slave ship, if you have been accustomed to subjugation, so much so that you don't even notice that the shackles on your ankles are indeed shackles, and you think under the circumstance that the most important thing is to separate men from women, or even a bigger irony, that on the slave ship heading to a penal colony, if your issue is whether the women on the slave ship are properly attired and properly covered in proper hijabs, when Allah gazes upon the slave ship that carries Muslims heading to a penal colony, and Allah listens in on what these enslaved Muslims are saying to one another, Can you imagine if those slaves on the slave ship heading to a penal colony believe that their plight will magically end if all the women on the slave ship become properly attired? Can you imagine if the slaves on the slave ship believe that their plight will magically come to an end if they straighten their lines in prayer, and if they pray enough sunnah prayers or extra prayers? Can you imagine if the slaves on the slave ship, instead of noticing their subjugation and noticing the true nature of their plight, are sitting there saying, well, it would be a good thing if the ship sinks altogether so we can all go to heaven, instead of rising to change their circumstance? This is so much like the affairs of Muslims in this world today. 20 years ago, when Sharon General Sharon, the man who was directly involved in the massacre of Sabra and Shatila, but because he's Israeli, instead of being tried as a war criminal, he was celebrated in his country and repeatedly elected to office. But 20 years ago, when Sharon violated the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque, the Muslim world exploded. The visit to the Aqsa Mosque sparked an entire intifada. 20 years later, just these past few days, Ben-Gvir, the man who is part of Netanyahu's government, just did what Sharon did 20 years ago. He violated again the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque. But this time, Russia, China, even the United States are raising the matter in the Security Council. There's no Palestinian intifada. There's no uproar from the Muslim world. The matter is being raised in the Security Council. And we all know the drill. If the Security Council drafts a resolution to condemn Israel, it will be vetoed by the United States. But even if it is not vetoed, and the Security Council condemns the government of Israel, so what? Israel knows that very well. Israel knows the game extremely well. So what? Go ahead, raise it in the Security Council. Go ahead, have your little deliberations. Go ahead, talk about how Jerusalem is occupied and 67 borders and the West Bank and Gaza, so on and so forth. Go ahead. have your little game. If that is your nufur, welcome. Good for you. If that is your nufur, you go to the Security Council and discuss the matter in the Security Council. The reason that 20 years ago there was an entire intifada, but today nothing happens, is because over those 20 years, Israel has gained complete control of the Aqsa Mosque. Over those 20 years, Israel, not the Islamic Waqf that is responsible for the Aqsa Mosque, decides who comes in and who doesn't come in, who has access to the holy site, the Islamic holy site, and who doesn't have access to the Islamic holy site. Palestinians don't have easy access to the Aqsa Mosque any longer. Israelis do, and Israel regularly allows Jewish extremists to violate the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque. But the reality doesn't just stop there. Although we have just started the year, (2022) was the bloodiest year for Palestinians. In 2022, 167 Palestinians were killed. 31 of them were children. This is the bloodiest year since the Second Intifada. But it is also the year of the Abraham Accords. And it is also the year where Israel achieved unprecedented acceptance in the Arab world. Now, just yesterday, another Palestinian was killed by Israeli forces. The fourth Palestinian killed since 2023. We're just few days into 2023, and already the fourth Palestinian has been slaughtered by Israeli forces in Israel or in Palestine. Meanwhile, the new extremist government of Netanyahu a parliamentary member who is also a member of Ben Gvir's party, Zvika Vogel, explained just recently that it is time to achieve the total subjugation of Palestinians. That it is not sufficient that we wage war against Gaza every 2 or 3 years. We have been too merciful and too kind. We need a total war to totally subjugate Palestinians. And then he comments, it would be worth it because this will be the final war. And after that, we can sit and raise doves and all the other beautiful birds that exist. An Israeli soldier who shot dead an autistic Palestinian child, was just promoted instead of being court-martialed. There's another article about this. Israel has been digging under the Aqsa Mosque for now 50 years, trying to find any archaeological evidence for its claim that the Aqsa Mosque was built over the site of the Jewish temples that were destroyed by the Romans. And in 50 years of digging under the Aqsa Mosque, they have not found a shred of evidence that this indeed was the site of the temples. But it doesn't matter, because you can talk about a total war against Palestinians, and you're not going to be branded a Jewish extremist. You're not going to be put on any terrorist list. You're not going to be blacklisted anywhere. You are not even going to be banned from entering the United Arab Emirates or in due time entering Saudi Arabia or entering Egypt or now indeed entering Sudan or entering Bahrain or entering Morocco. You will be on you will not be put on no-fly lists. You are not going to be even demonized by the media. You can talk about a genocide and an apartheid against Palestinians, and there will be no consequences. After all, Ben Gvir himself, who is on record calling Muslims nothing but animals, hardly human, and yet, Ben Gvir is welcome in the US, welcome in Britain, welcome in France, even welcome in the United Arab Emirates, and in due time will be welcome in Saudi, and is welcome in Egypt. There are no consequences. It is not simply the issue of the Aqsa Mosque and what does God do about a people who fail to protect the sanctity of what Allah has told them is sanctified. But collectively as Muslims, when the world continues to communicate to us that you have no rights, you have no dignity worth of observing. When Sweden, for instance, recently has closed down close to 20 Islamic schools. One of the schools they closed down is because a board member who's Syrian visited Syria to see his family. And when he returned from Syria, the Swedish government said, well, we don't know if this board member harbors extremist views. And they closed down the Islamic school. This is, of course, after France having closed down countless mosques and Islamic schools, after Switzerland having done the same, after Denmark having done the same, after the Netherlands having done the same, and now Sweden is doing the same. And time and again, the world communicates to us Muslims, you are indeed on a slave ship heading to a penal colony. You collectively as Muslims don't have the right to have your beliefs, your sanctities, your narratives, your identity honored or respected. You are presumptively suspect and will remain presumptively suspect because you are racialized and dominated and erased. So when Allah tells us, infiru, under these circumstances, what does Allah want? Does Allah want us to pick up a gun that we don't even manufacture, to shoot bullets that we don't even manufacture, and a technology that we have imported and we do not pioneer? Does Allah want us to explode the bomb? Far from it. Neither bullets nor bombs. But this is a world of intelligent power and intelligent flow of information. It is the world that can construct a Muslim as a scary terrorist while casting and portraying Ibn Gvir as simply a Jew or an Israeli with some excesses. A little bit too much, that's all. It is the world of information and narrative. That is the true power. The true nufur is the world of the construction of intellectual knowledge and who is able to dominate and prevail in this game. Time and again, we come to the same problem. Wealthy Muslims do not spend for their cause. And when they spend, they exhibit a most fascinating phenomena. If they spend money in God's way, they spend it to bolster up, in other words, to perform nufur, using their money with they themselves, the wealthy Muslim, at the center stage of the nufur. So that, for instance, if you're a medical doctor and you finally do spend the money in God's way, you expect that because you're spending this money, you're going to be the center of the board of directors, or you're going to be the center of the think tank, or you are going to be the center of the Islamic center. Why would a dentist be giving khutbahs, or an owner of a sportswear store be giving khutbahs? Why is this phenomena? Quite simply, because the doctor, the dentist, the owner of a sports store that doesn't understand that in this day and age, their nufur, instead of spending money to enable the proper powerhouses, in order to enable the proper abilities, they spend the money to center themselves in the heart of the nufur. They don't understand that in this day and age, a dentist, a medical doctor, an owner of a sports store, or whoever it is, simply does not have the epistemological sophistication, the layering of knowledge to be effective in today's world. The nufur of this age is that you spend money to empower those who are otherwise qualified, not to empower yourself, not to create theater in which you play the central role or the leading role. Because as long as you do that, we remain on the slave ship, sailing to a penal colony. And we distract ourselves from the reality that we live in by indulging the theater of the rich, the performances of rich people in an otherwise comical theater that simply distracts us from the horrible fate that we are heading to. قولوا قولي هذا واستغفر لي والله لي ولكم اسأل الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين يا رب العالمين. For many years, I worked with a very good man at Human Rights Watch. His name is Kenneth Roth. Recently, Kenneth Roth, after having run Human Rights Watch for 30 years, and as a staunch advocate of human rights, Kenneth Roth have earned the enmity and hostility of dictators all around the world. After announcing his retirement, he was approached by the folks of the Kern Center at the Kennedy School at Harvard. The Kennedy School is an extremely influential school. It's very influential as a think tank because it has incredible influence on foreign policy and foreign policy makers. And unfortunately, recently, the Kennedy School has become all tangled up with the intelligence community in the United States, the CIA, and also Israeli intelligence, the Mossad. But within the Kennedy School, there are centers, like the center that offered Kenneth Ross a position that focused on human rights issues rather than issues that empower the United States to continue to be a world hegemon and to continue acting like a colonial power in the world. Anyway, as unfortunately I would expect, the appointment of Kenneth Ross at Harvard and the Kennedy School was not approved. And was not approved because during his tenure as the director of Human Rights Watch, Kenneth Ross, although he himself is a Jew and his parents are Holocaust survivors, and although in his long tenure at Human Rights Watch, he has been vigilant in condemning all types of human rights violators, but the unforgivable sin that he has committed is that he also criticized Israel as a human rights violator. In fact, Israel, every year on the human rights scale where different countries are scored, Israel achieves a score of 3 or 4 every year, putting it in a class with Angola, Colombia, Turkey, and Zimbabwe. And although Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, and in fact the UN itself, has noted that Israel is indeed an apartheid state, that Israel indeed treats Palestinians as a subjugated second class, none of that mattered. And the dean of Harvard denied Kenneth Ross a position because of his criticisms of Israel. There is a very important article that I hope people will read called "Why the Godfather of Human Rights is Not Welcome at Harvard." But the thing that struck me and caught my attention in this article is the article goes on to describe how various parties have influence at the Kennedy School at Harvard and how they gained that influence. And the article describes in some detail how various wealthy Jewish investors donated millions of dollars to the Kennedy School to look out, to care for the causes that they care about, i.e. Israel. And because of the millions of dollars that were given by wealthy individuals who otherwise are not center stage, unlike Muslims, they don't give the money and then demand to be at the center of everything. They give money to empower those who in fact are qualified to play a role in politics, to play the role that they are qualified for. And they sit back and they watch how their cause is served. And as always, I wondered, what is it? What is it? What are we Muslims so proud about? Why are we so full of ourselves? Other people give handsomely to serve their causes. Hindus, Buddhists, Baha'is, they spend handsomely to empower themselves. Although Islamophobia has exploded upon the universe, and we all see the effects of Islamophobia, from China to India to Burma to Sweden to France, everywhere. And yet, wealthy Muslim will spend money, yes, as long as he gets to give the khutbah, to give the lectures at Friday, as long as he becomes recognized as a grand imam of sorts. But to spend money to support talents, imagine if the benefactors that supported Mozart or supported Bach or supported Beethoven, or the benefactors today that buy a Stradivarius violin for millions of dollars, what do they do with the violin that they buy for millions of dollars? They loan it out to qualified virtuoso to play the violin. Imagine if these rich people, instead of loaning the violin to a qualified violinist to play, they insisted that they themselves are going to play it. This is exactly what Muslims do. Instead of spending the money to support the Bach, imagine if that wealthy person said, well, I'm going to support the arts, but I have to be recognized as the central composer. And they have no talent. They're not a Bach, they're not a Mozart, they're not a Beethoven. Imagine. This is precisely what Muslims do. Muslims do not support students that are studying at Princeton or Harvard or Yale or my school, UCLA. They don't support academics at any prestigious institution. They want to spend the money so that they can become center stage of the Islamic theater, of the Islamic nonsense. So we end up being comical. We end up producing tragic comedies because we perform theater on a slave ship heading to a penal colony. What is it that makes a committed Jew give Harvard $30 million, $40 million? What are Muslims spending money on? Ronaldo got a contract for 170 million pounds, British pounds, from Saudi Arabia. Messi got a contract for $122 million from Saudi Arabia. Another story about how Saudi Arabia spent millions of dollars to influence Wikipedia and influence how Wikipedia portrays the Saudi regime. Allah said, "Infiru." But the Quran was written to address reasonable, rational people. What can the Quran or Allah do? If you tell people, "Infiru fi sabilillah," but the person receiving your message is not rational and not reasonable. The person receiving the message says, "Oh, I must be a jack of all trades. Yes, I am a dentist. Yes, I own a sports shop. Yes, I know nothing. And yes, I read nothing. Yes, I am ignorant, but I am going to pretend that I am God's gift to the world." And I'm going to spend money so I can play center stage. Yes, I wouldn't even understand what people are talking about in places like Harvard or Yale or Princeton. Yes, I cannot sit in a proper intellectual lecture and even follow what is being said. But it doesn't matter. My understanding of Nufur is all about me. I must be God's gift to the world. I must be the liberator of Jerusalem. I must be the liberator, so I'm just going to pretend that I play that role. And my fellow Muslims will sit there and clap and do takbirs. And the slave ship keeps sailing to the penal colony. Our fate. And a voice comes out of the darkness. Says, people, my brothers and sisters, it's not about the hijab. It's not about separating men and women. It's not even about whether we have straight lines when we're praying. It's not whether we are given water to do our wudu. We are on a freaking slave ship heading to a penal colony. And all Muslims look at this person and say, why are you bothering us? We were indulging in our crazy fantasies of make-believe. Let the Palestinians be murdered. Let the Aqsa be violated. Let the Muslims perish in the concentration camps in China. Let Muslims perish as refugees from Burma. Let Islamophobia close centers and mosques all over Europe. Let Islamophobia carry someone like Trump to power. Let all of that happen, but don't disturb our fantasies on that slave ship sailing to a penal colony. اللهم اغفر لنا اللهم اعف عنا اللهم ارحمنا يا رب العالمين اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا. Allah forgive our sins. Allah grant us wisdom and perception and knowledge. Help us rise up in your cause, but to do so rationally and reasonably and faithfully and sagaciously. Allah, help us help ourselves. يا رب العالمين وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأقم الصلاة.